And thanks everyone for coming to hang out with us tonight to talk all about college admissions and things you can do to prepare your student for the college process. So let me take a moment and share my screen and I'll go through the presentation. And again, if you, as I go through the presentation, as questions come up, please feel free to put them in the chat so you don't forget. And this way we can make sure that we get to everyone's questions during this presentation. Okay. There we go. All right, can you see the slide deck okay on your end? And let me know. Okay, great. And if hopefully you will hear me okay. All right, so college planning and college admissions 101. This is our annual workshop that we offer for families in the community. There are three things that we will discuss today. So the first thing will be what admissions officers look for. The second thing will be really about the timeline. So once we know what admissions officer is looking for, it's about how do you prepare your student. We're going to focus first on 8th to 10th graders because what should be doing is very different. And then the last part will be if you have a student who's between 11th and 12th grade, what they should be doing. So it's a lot about what the admissions officers look for, and then how you would prepare depending on where your student is in their high school journey. So before I get into the content, let me just take a step back and introduce myself. I'm Bethany Goldzer. I've been working with Potomac Oak Tutoring for about 3 years now. My undergraduate degree is in history from University of Chicago as pre-med, but decided to go more into education and became a teacher. And then from there, I became a counselor just because my passion has always been with helping students take that next step from high school to college. Just that the experience was very transformative for me. And I just love that I have a hand in helping young people really make their dreams happen through where they go to school and just all the experiences that come with that. So I've worked as a college counselor for the last 18 years with students all over the place. I'm based in the New York City, Long Island area, but work with a lot of students in Montgomery County and Fairfax County and really pretty much like all over the country doing this work. All right, so first topic is what admissions officers are looking for. So we know that college is more getting admitted into college, especially very selective colleges, more competitive than ever. And there are particular things that admissions officers are looking for. And I'm going to go over those with you. So the first thing is that they really want high achieving students. Having a high GPA, having high test scores are those two factors are the biggest indicators of a student's ability to succeed in college. So those are important. And now that we're outside of COVID, the pandemic, there is no longer, like, we know that test scores matter. So, really at this point, students shouldn't consider test optional, or at least they should take the test, because admissions officers really value those scores. Now, here are some of the questions that we often get. One would be, which GPA should I report? Would it be the unweighted or the weighted GPA? I always advise students to go with the GPA at the highest, and oftentimes that is that weighted GPA. And you would indicate that you're reporting the weighted GPA, but it's usually a bit higher, and pretty much students across the board are reporting that weighted GPA. So I think that's just usually the better score to go with. When we get questions about honors and AP classes, the rigor of the academic program matters. So it's not just about having a high GPA, it's also having a GPA that indicates that student took advantage of the most difficult program that the school offered, but that the student could still succeed in. So I don't want a student to overwhelm themselves with a lot of AP and honors courses, and that they're not going to do well in those classes. So there is a balancing act, and the student and parent pretty much has to know what the student is capable of doing and take on that challenge when it's reasonable. But if they realize that it might not be a good challenge for them, then really opting out of that and sort of maybe taking the regular class instead. So I'll give you a good example that comes up. It will be with physics. Sometimes AP physics would be a really challenging course for a student, even if they are really good in STEM. And so they'll take the regular physics. Or statistics. They might decide not to take statistics, because to take that on top of Calc BC and then whatever other really intense STEM AP classes is just too much. So it really is sort of case by case what your student can handle. But I think the general guideline is most difficult course curriculum that your school offers within the ability, like within your students' ability to succeed in those courses. And it really is something that has to happen on an annual basis, like that kind of assessment. The next thing would be how many APs. So again, you want to think about the number of AP courses that your school offers. And then usually the question that an admissions officer is thinking about is, did the student take advantage to their full capacity? So if your school offers 10 AP classes, how many of those 10 did you take? Within reason. I mean, so there does come, like, if it's not really aligned with your students' interests, then if they're not interested in STEM, then many of those AP courses like AP Bio, AP Chemistry, AP Physics doesn't necessarily make sense to take. So they would put that student in context and say, like, what is the intended academic path? And then did they take advantage of the most AP classes that they could take where that makes sense? In terms of scores, AP scores definitely matter. So I want students to take that AP class very seriously. I want them to take the AP exam and really aim to get as high as they can, ideally a 4 or 5, because that really gives a strong message to the college that the student is ready for a college curriculum and that they can excel in the college level. And that really is the big question that an admissions officer is thinking about as they're evaluating that student's academic record is, can they handle the caseload, the course load of the curriculum that we offer at this particular institution. And it will vary depending on the institution, the level of rigor. So the student has to prove that depending on the school. They really have to be able to prove that. And they do that in the classes that they take, in the scores that they get in those classes, and then of course their standardized test scores. Now, another question we get all the time is, well, which test should I take? Should I take the ACT? Should I take the SAT? I always advise you take the one that you feel the most comfortable in, that you're scoring the best in, that you, I mean, it really will vary. And there's really no rhyme or reason. I have some students who do better on the SAT, others who do better on the ACT. You just have to see which one is just where you're getting better scores and you feel comfortable taking that test. Like you feel comfortable sitting for that particular test and for multiple sittings. And in terms of when you should take it, usually it can be somewhere between, late 10th grade and then as late as 12th grade, depending on how the student scores. I think on average, I'm seeing students take the test anywhere between 2 and 3 times, just to make sure that they've sat for enough times, that they've seen the best that they can do, and that they can activate scored choice, which is where, in some cases that allow colleges that allow scored choice means that the student can choose their 2 highest scores and put those together as their composite score and report that to a school. So when you sit for multiple sittings, then it allows you to do that, as opposed to just having the one score. Now, let's get into some more subjective factors. So schools will say that, we're very holistic in our evaluation of candidates. We look beyond the scores, and that's true. And so some of the next biggest thing that they look at are the students' activities that they've done throughout high school. So if your student is targeting very selective schools like top 20 colleges and Ivy Leagues, then they are looking for students who have done, we call these tier 1 type activities. So there's tier 1, there's tier 2. Tier 2 activities are pretty much your more common activities that we see a lot, like robotics club, math Olympiad, just things that are offered by the school. Some of the Montgomery, the Summer Rise program that Montgomery County has, that's like a tier 2 activity. It's just something that doesn't mean that it's a great thing that students do, but it's very common. But it's important that students have that experience. It gives them like a really good baseline to show that they've had a breadth of experiences that have given them exposure to things that they're passionate about, or the world of work, working with people, all of those things. Tier 1 activities are activities that really can set a student apart. It almost shows them as some, I want to say like a specialist. Like they've curated some sort of experience and they've really digged into that and they showed that they can excel in that. And there's usually some sort of recognition that comes with that. So that could be winning an award or being at the top in their particular field because they've authored a paper. They've they've participated in a really highly competitive summer program, like at the National Institute of Health. They've founded an organization. And I have, just from this year, I wrote down a couple of examples of students that I have who were admitted into top 20 Ivies, Johns Hopkins, Duke, and Yale. So one student was a nationally ranked debater through Potomac Oak Tutoring, and she's going to Johns Hopkins. She also founded a nonprofit that works internationally. So she had a couple of things going on her resume and applied as an early decision public health applicant. So just that T1 activities that she had along with her intended interest in public health, I think really helped her application stand out for Johns Hopkins. Another student who was admitted to Cornell organized a food drive that brought media attention from all over the region, and a politician gave her a citation. Another student won a Taco Bell Live Más $25,000 scholarship. The student was admitted into Yale. In addition to that scholarship, where she had to make a video about her community involvement, she had over 500 community service hours. Like I had never seen a student reach the level of community involvement that she had reached, and like really unique types of volunteer experiences. And then this other student who had been admitted into Georgia Tech, University of Michigan, UVA, just a lot of the really top engineering programs, she won a national level robotics competition. So, and I see this time and time and again that the students that are doing something that they're celebrated and brings national attention or some sort of accolade that shows that they've excelled in a field that's aligned with what they want to major in, it can make a big difference in terms of admissions into the Ivies and top 20 schools. All right, so let's just talk a little bit more about test scores, just because we hear this a lot when students come in and they're wondering about test optional and how it does impact their admissions into schools. And we know it matters. It matters to report a score. It matters to report the highest score that the student can possibly report. So this chart just gives a rundown of very selective schools like Emory, Georgia Tech, UPenn, and how much it increases your admissions when you submit a score. So you can see like Emory 123%, it's like Georgia Tech 121%. What this slide shows is that schools want to see a score. It just, again, it is the biggest indicator of a student's ability to succeed at that campus and graduate. And that's the main directive of an admissions officer, is that they are tasked with recruiting a class that is guided by the president, the strategic plan, the core values of the university, and they need to ensure that the students that they recruit actually graduate and within 4 years. So that's a key metric for them, and the way that they decide that is those test scores. So students should definitely plan to take tests. They should plan to do as well as they can, and they should plan to report that score to increase their chances. Now, we know that it's very competitive to get into college, particularly the Ivy League schools. So this chart just shows you how much harder it's become over the last 6 years, which we know. I mean, we know from everything that's in the media. We know from just being in the community and watching others in previous years go through the process. But I think what this chart does, it hits home. It's like, wow, this is, it's insane. I mean, Harvard in 2018, they were already getting 40,000 applications, and now in 2024, they were like 70,000. And I mean, they're just going to be like 80,000 soon. I mean, and the problem is that this number of first-year spots that are offered haven't increased. So that's what's driving down the admissions rates. These schools have just become more popular. The test optional movement did have a lot to do with that when they did away with test scores and students felt they could apply And so I think that, maybe we'd expect there would be an increase in the acceptance rates when tests were reinstated, but there's really no evidence of that. I mean, there's still students are still applying to these schools in record numbers. And those were the private schools. We're seeing the same thing in our public schools. So what interesting, University of Maryland, uh, I mean, this year they denied a lot of top students from Montgomery and Howard counties. Um, just so many more students that are really strong, high performing are deciding to apply to University of Maryland and stay local. Now, good news is all of my students were accepted into University of Maryland, which I'm so grateful for that. I do think one of the big strategies that I like to activate with UMD is to get that application in as early as possible. So I do aim for September 15th that students have all the UMD applications in, just so that they're top of the pile. And I'll also talk about later how it's so important to develop a relationship with the admissions office early on so that they're not afraid if they admit a top performing student that they won't actually come to the school, which is often one of the reasons why a student that is high performing, that has great SAT scores, great GPA, lots of activities, great essays, would still get denied because there's this concern that they won't really come to UMD. There are other options for them. So I just want you to be aware of what the reality of the situation is. Now, one of the things that we do, we have a really great success rate at Potomac Oak Tutoring in getting our students into really outstanding institutions. And that's because we're very strategic. So I am going to give you some insight into what that strategy looks like. One thing we always do is we look at the major, depending on the student's major and the school that they want to apply to. So within a university, universities like Carnegie Mellon, like this chart shows, are divided into multiple colleges. So there's the College of Fine Arts, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, the College of Engineering. And you have to know this for each of your colleges. It's actually an activity I do with students where we actually map out the major and then we find the school that it's located within. Now, depending on the specific college they're applying to, the acceptance rates can be different. So you'll see in this chart, if you're applying to Carnegie Mellon as an architecture student within the College of Fine Arts, their acceptance rate is 34%. It's pretty good. But then when you compare that to a student applying to the School of Computer Science, then the acceptance rate is 7%, which is like, I mean, that's the lottery. It's like, it's similar to an Ivy League institution. It's harder to get into Carnegie Mellon as a computer science student than many of the Ivy League colleges. So it is something you do need to look at. And that is a strategy that we activate, is what major makes the most sense. There is some flexibility that students may have. I have students who are interested in computer science, but they could also study physics. And so if they mention physics, if they mention that they could study math, then that puts them in the College of Arts, College of Humanities and Social Sciences. And so then we can, not for Carnegie Mellon. For other schools, it could put you in the College of Arts and Sciences. For Carnegie Mellon, it puts you in the College of Science, but that's still a big difference in the acceptance rate. So we look at that case by case to see, like, what major does it make sense, depending on the school, to apply as. And I also want students to see how easy it is to transfer over. Like if they really do want to be in the School of Computer Science when they get there, then they find out how easy that is. And I've had students go to Carnegie Mellon, they've been able to transfer over to the College of Computer Science. I've had students do this at Cornell, where they applied to Cornell's College of Arts and Sciences. And when they get to Cornell a couple years or a year or two later, they transfer into the College of Engineering. And they get to study what they want, because so many of these schools have a core program anyway that they have to take you through the first 2 years that you don't really get to declare majors. So it is something that we look up, but it's one of those strategies that we can use to improve or optimize the students' admissions chances. Another factor is demographics. So this chart is showing how gender outcomes are very different for MIT. So females have a higher acceptance rate than male students. So male students, it's pretty much been consistent between 4 and 6%, where females' acceptance rates can go as high as it's 13%, 14%, which is pretty good for MIT. And so sometimes that can matter. Those aren't things that a student can necessarily control because it's your demographics, but this is important because it manages expectations. So students can kind of get a sense that even though you might read that MIT has an acceptance rate of 8%, like maybe it could be lower for you if you fall in a particular demographic. So there's other things we have to do in your application to really optimize whatever chances you have left, like if you're a male student, for example. So another factor that could matter that we used in our strategy is when you apply. So when you apply, it can certainly make the difference in your chances as well. So this chart shows for Cornell in the class of 2026, the overall acceptance rate was 7.3%, but you do need to drill down and see what that means. So because there's 2 application cycles that a student can submit to Cornell. So it would be the early decision cycle, which is it's a binding application. So that means when the student applies, they have to commit. If they get admitted, they have to commit to Cornell, and then they would have to withdraw their applications from any other school for which they don't have a decision for yet. That is 19.2%. And I can also tell you geographically that number is different. So in New York, it can be as high as 28% acceptance rate. And for a regular decision, it's 5% if a student decides to wait. So the chances go down tremendously. And so a student who is really interested in Cornell, oftentimes they'll be guided towards maybe Cornell's the better ED. If the family wants to do an ED school, then Cornell might be the best choice for them, given how high the chances are there. So those are just some examples, and there's so many other things that we look at just to decide what the strategy is going to be and how to really optimize the students' admissions chances. I mean, that's really the goal, and how we do that. Okay, so beyond what the college admissions officers are looking for, let's talk about preparation. Like what are those things that you can do? So beyond the strategy, getting higher scores and things like that, what are some of the things that you can really do now to prepare your student for this competitive process? All right, so where your student goes to high school matters. So if you're in between eighth, ninth, and 10th grade, these are the things you should do early on in 8th grade when I'm working with students. And we do work with students. I mean, I have a 7th grader that I was working with. So we work with students early on, because when a student begins this process early on, they have a lot more options. I mean, we're going through this with such a high level of intentionality, and they just have so many things that they can work on, and it puts them in a better position for very selective institutions. So I do tell families that if your sights are set on a top 20 school, you should definitely get your students started as early as possible. And that would include 8th grade. All right, so which high school is your student attending? That's an important question. It's about just that school being a good environment for your student to thrive. Do they offer the right classes, types of activities, the level of rigor that's needed? What's their pipeline look like? Are they a feeder school for some of the colleges that you might want your student to go to? It's just, believe it or not, schools, the previous colleges don't like surprises, so they tend to go the way, in terms of admissions, they tend to go the way they did the previous year. So if they admitted, let's say it's UPenn, and UPenn admitted 9 students from your high school, which is a lot, they pretty much stick to that kind of number again. Like they stick to those same metrics, especially if that class ended up doing really well and they graduated. So they follow this longitudinal data, and they come up with like numbers on how many they're going to accept from a certain school, and they just stick with that. They pretty much stick with that. So I know families who will go to particular high schools just because that their school is a feeder for a Penn or for a Princeton. Okay, so that, and then along with all that, just it has to be a good school for your student to thrive in. They offer the right activities, and it just makes sense for your student to go there. Other things that you want to think about within and start to plan for is what the academic major will be for the student. So gone are the days where students should apply as an undecided candidate. I mean, the really the big purpose of high school is this time period for a student to explore and take multiple classes, engage with different activities, have conversations with peers and teachers and advisors and coaches. And in that time period, they should be developing some sense of what their interests are academically. So students have to show that they've done that work and that they've been intentional about curating that academic program and then really choosing a major. And I usually advise students to look at 3 potential majors that they could pursue, knowing that there's, they might change their mind at some point, but we want to do the work of exploring potential majors. And that's just going to help with so many things, even just making sure we're targeting the right colleges that offer the programs that they are potentially interested in. Okay. We want to be strategic. So I've said this word a few times about being intentional. So we want to set goals. When I'm working with students between 8th and 10th grade, we are setting 3 types of goals. We're setting a college goal, and that's really around exploration, getting more comfortable with the idea of college, how colleges are set up, what kind of colleges are out there, what types of colleges could be a good fit for them. We're coming up with a career level goal, which is really focused on that exposure to different careers and academic majors that lead to those careers, and success stories, like reading about different people that have succeeded in the career that they're interested in, shadowing, having informational interviews, and that just exposure gives students a level of comfortability, but also the vocabulary, like a way to really talk about it and check if this is really the career path, potential career path that they want to pursue. And then the third type of goal is a personal goal. So students are still developing as young people. So they are developing an identity, they're developing just various capabilities that are going to allow them to succeed in life. I like students to be really aware of where there are opportunities for growth and come up with a goal for that. So that could be something around time management, self-advocacy, uh, uh, like being more resourceful, whatever it may be. It's something that I'll meet with when I meet with a student, we talk about it and we come up with a goal, and then they work on something different every year. And that's going to help them so much. Just even with, it's a common college application essay question to talk about your growth. And so just a student being that aware and working on something when it comes time to have that reflective essay, they have really strong things to write about. So many schools, next thing is that we are looking at Naviance. So many schools offer access to either Naviance or SCORE. These are databases where just a lot of the students' academic things are located. They have a lot of information about colleges. They have college admissions outcome data for the school. In this, I want students to put everything in Naviance and really use Naviance. I teach students how to use Naviance, particularly the scattergram feature, so they can get a really good handle on what their chances are for admission into a particular school based on their academic profile. And we also want their student to have a strong curriculum. So we talked about earlier the importance of taking advantage of the most rigorous courses that the school offers within a student's ability to succeed in those courses. And so I'm always doing a deep dive with the student into the curriculum, and then we're aligning their goals, with their academic goals and their career interests to the classes that are offered at the school. And sometimes it's looking at, and if a student says they want to be a lawyer, then we're looking at, okay, what skills do you need to be a lawyer? I need to be a critical thinker. I need to be a great writer. I need to be able to ask great questions. I need to be able to work with a variety of types of people. I need to be well-versed in international issues. And so we think about those skill sets, and then we align the electives with electives with what's going to the classes that are going to give them those particular skills. So the way that I like to use the way that we think about the curriculum is definitely you have to take the classes that meets Maryland graduation requirements. Then we look at rigor. And then we look at the career piece. And really, I love students to use the electives to fill out those classes that show that they've done more exploration and skill building around their career or potential major. And then if there are any classes left, then it's whatever you just want to do for fun. So if you want to take ceramics, if you want to take, mixed media arts, then that's fine. But after we've taken care of rigorous curriculum, Maryland graduation requirements, rigor, and career, our career goals. So test prep timeline, we go through that. We talk about the actual timeline and then whatever prep might be needed for the student to succeed. Potomac Oak Tutoring will offer SAT prep. So students can get advice to do whatever prep that they need to do in order to ensure the highest score possible, because that really has to be the goal. And I've worked in this field for a long time, and I can tell you that like most students are capable of getting the score that they want. Especially if they have enough time to do it. And when you're in between 8th and 10th grade, the biggest asset you have is the time. You have the time to prepare, you have the time to take practice tests, and you don't have that same pressure that a student may have who's in 11th or 12th grade. And so that can really help students in this time period. Summer is another big asset that goes along with the time that students have early on. And so, you have the more summers that you have to volunteer, to do that career exploration work, like shadowing, like doing internships, or, traveling, which can really, if students use travel the right way. I've had students turn traveling summer travel to India or to China into opportunities to take on service learning projects with under-resourced children in those regions, or really come up with things that are going to strengthen their application. So we do a lot of that. Like, how are we going to use our summer strategically so that we are preparing ourselves for this next step? And prioritizing. So time management is so important in this time period. So I'm usually one of the first personal goals that I work on with a student is time management and learning how to prioritize things that matter and really putting things on the back burner. And sometimes sometimes one of the biggest things that I have to help students do is transitioning out of an activity that they've done for a few years so that they can make room in their schedule for another activity that is more in line with where they're going. And I've had athletes do that. They've had to give up sports that they played just because it didn't really make sense anymore. They've lost interest in it, and it did not leave enough room in their schedule to do some of these other things. So this planning period is a lot of just opening up space for the student to build goals, showing them how to use resources, and planning and being reflective, and a lot of aligning. So I love the planning phase because, again, time is our biggest asset, and we use it to its fullest capacity to make sure we're building a great pathway to college. Okay, so when we get into 11th and 12th grade, this is really what the timeline is focused on. It's a lot more tactical because they're deliverables. These things are attached to deliverables that a student will need to develop. Okay, so one is there are a few things that we have to come up with in 11th grade. So I'll talk about 11th grade, what the key focuses are, the key deliverables are. One is a college list. And that college list should be a list of balance of schools of varying ranges of selectivity where the student would be happy. Like, they would be just as happy going to Virginia Tech as they would be at University of Maryland, for example. Virginia Tech might be more of a safety school for them. UMD might be more of a target/reach for them, but they would be just as happy going to either of those schools. So we want students to have a range of schools that are safety schools, target schools, and reach schools. I want students to have a resume, a really strong resume that basically gives a full snapshot of all of their experiences, I like students to quantify as much as possible their impact that they've made in those activities. So it's not just a laundry list of, here's what I did. It's more like, here was my role, and here's what I brought to those different activities, and here's how I brought impact to others and to myself. I want students to have their letters of recommenders all worked out and have have artifacts that they can share with that recommender to strengthen the recommendation letters. And the recommenders are going to be all types of people. So they're going to be their teachers, they should be advisors, coaches, they can be professors if they've had internships or research positions. They could be varying type of people. And then I want a student to have a finished college essay. I love when the college essay is done by the end of 11th grade. The Common app usually announces the prompts early on, sometimes between February and March. And so we already know what the prompts are going to be. So there's no reason why a student needs to wait until senior year to start the college essay. And so those are really the 4 core things that I'm working on with a student during their 11th grade year. And then also one other thing that I've instituted this year really strongly is that a student creates a demonstrated interest plan. And that is really what that's focused on is 3 things. It's connecting with the college through college fairs, college in-person college visits, virtual college visits. It's engaging with the college online so that college can see that that student is highly interested in their school. And then the third most important piece is that they are building advocates at the campus level. So that means they are connecting with the college admissions officers, they're connecting with professors, they're connecting with alum. I'm having students set up LinkedIn profiles this year since they all have resumes. We're taking it a step further. We're setting up LinkedIn profiles, and then that's an easy way for them to connect also with folks connected to the university. And I'm showing them how to send LinkedIn messages that are cold, and students have gotten really good results from that. So those are just examples of things that we do in 11th grade just to increase the students' chances. Now, supplementals and things, so when we get into the actual application and supplemental essays, that I wait until after the common application has been released. A new one has been reset August 1st of a student's senior year. And that's because every year colleges change their supplemental questions. Like this year, a lot of schools are probably going to change their supplemental questions, just given everything that's happening. So we wait till then, and I work with students on the supplemental essays. And essays that's usually the most laborsome part of the application. So students might have to write anywhere between, I don't know, like 1 in 10 essays, depending on the selectivity of the schools that they're targeting. So they do need to allow ample time to write those essays because it takes, it could take, I mean, what I'm hearing from students, 3 to 4 hours per essay that they have to write. And that doesn't include the editing time. And that's just have to allow a lot of time for that as well. Now, timeline for submission is something that we talk about. I don't want students to work on essays of schools that are due for regular decision when they have early decision or early action applications that they have to fill out. So let's talk about the different cycles because this determines the order in which a student will work on an application. So early decision is the first one I'll talk about because this is a really key strategy that a lot of families activate to help give a little boost in admissions chances because early decision is what's it called? It's an example of it is a demonstrated interest point. So any student who's clearly very interested in the school will apply early decision because they're basically saying, if you admit me, I will go here and I won't go anywhere else. So in exchange for that level of commitment, it can lead to a higher rate of admission. So what's also great about it, less stress, and students hear back early. So the early decision application can be anywhere between October and December. I mostly see between October 15th and November 15th. And the student will hear back in December. And so that can be really nice when you hear back from the school early on. Now, you shouldn't do early decision if financial aid is a concern, because once you apply early decision, you don't have any leverage when it comes to financial aid. Now, some schools, it don't matter because they don't give merit money. So many of the Ivies don't give merit scholarships, so it's a moot point. But for schools that do give merit scholarships, that do give money, then maybe you wouldn't want to apply early decision and you need it because they won't give you merit, and also it limits your opportunity to apply to other schools that are more affordable. So like Maryland, and if a student applies early decision, gets admitted, they have to withdraw their University of Maryland application, for example, before you even hear back. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, early action has a similar admissions deadlines as early decision, but early action is not binding. So with early action applications, a student can apply to as many early action schools as they want, unless it's a restricted early action school. So with restricted early action, there are a few of them, the student can only apply to you actually need to read what the stipulations are because it will vary. But I've seen it where you can only apply to early action schools. You can apply REI to our school. You can apply early action to as many public schools as you want, but you cannot apply to any private schools that have early decision programs. So with restrictive early action, you just have to read what the specific stipulation is. But early action, by and large, means you can apply to the school early. You don't have to commit if you get in. So it's great. And it might come with slightly higher admissions rates than regular decision, but it can be really, it's a really good option. And many of the public schools offer early action. Now, regular decision is just a regular round. It's the largest pool, which is why acceptance rates are generally much lower in the regular decision pool, because a college has gone through the first cycle and they've admitted their students, and some schools admit like most of their class during the early action round. So UMD is one of those schools that admits, most of their students during the early action round. And so with regular decision, they're just sweeping through and getting what's left. And so it just makes it more competitive in that round. And it's usually due somewhere between January and February. Rolling admission is first come, first serve. So what that means is as soon as the student applies, the college will look at it and give that student a decision. So there's not really a set time, and they work on that cycle until the class is full. And so once their class is full, then they might not have any spots. So with rolling decision schools, I usually advise students to apply as soon as possible. So going back to my comment I made earlier about UMD, the way I usually work with students and advise them on UMD, just to ensure that they get in, is we apply as early as possible. So I treat UMD like a rolling admission school. Like it's like we get that application in September 15th. Okay, so Common App opens August 1st, September 15th. And my thought is that this way they beat the rush, they're at the top of the pile, and they're showing UMD an act of demonstrated interest, because it's like, listen, I must be really interested in your school. I must be really intent on coming here because I worked so hard to get my application in as soon as I can. And so I find that actually has been very fruitful with UMD, because like I said, all my kids that applied, they all got in to UMD, which made me happy. Okay. Scope of work. Essays. So we talked about essays. We talked about the in senior year is when we start to work on this supplemental essays. We want to get that general essay done early on. The most important thing about essays, so for the general essay, which is the essay that goes to all the schools that are on the Common App, I want the student to be as authentic as possible. I want them to go over something that hasn't been shared in any other part of their application. It's really it's a story. it's a growth exercise. So I like there to be a story that shows some level of growth. It is very personable. That admissions officer can relate to that student and they can see that student on their university. That's really the focus of the general college essay. The supplemental essays for schools that offer those, so it can range. Schools can have as from 1 to 4 or 5 essays, or they can have short answer responses. With those, students have to be strategic. Okay. So the way that I advise students to work on the essays is really to write them by type. Just this is a more efficient way. So it's about helping the student efficiently write essays. And so I advise students to write by type. So what I mean by that is we're going to write a why this college essay, a why this major essay, a leadership experience essay, or a community service essay, a most significant activity essay, a book that we've read, or an idea, or an intellectual experience we've had. So we put it in buckets, and this way a student can write one like templated essay, and then they adapt it for the other schools. Now, the adaptations need to be like really, they have to get really specific so that school feels like that essay was uniquely written for them. And really the way we get around that is I'll have students do some research, like I'll have them do like a research page or two on each of their schools. And once they have that data on that school, like classes, professors, alumni stories, quotes, or things like that they can point to from college visits or things that they've seen, then I show them how to adapt that essay with that new content and recycle it as needed, just to like so that it sounds unique. So it's worked. It's worked really well, and students are saving a lot of time. On average, students are submitting their applications 6 weeks before the due dates. And again, that is on purpose because I just find that is a strategy in itself when you get these applications in early, not only because it relieves that stress, it's not this ongoing stress that the student has to endure throughout the early part of senior year, but I also think it sends a strong message to colleges that the students that highly interested, that they submitted a high quality application in very early. They're top of the pile. All right, other things are additional materials. So the senior will need to get those letters of recommendation. So in junior year, they would have already identified the teachers, the counselors, employers, coaches, coordinators, whoever they feel can speak best about them. They would have already identified these people, and now they need to make sure that the person gets that letter to them. So schools usually have their own system to get the letters from the teachers. Like Naviance is a core resource that's connected to Common App, and students get notifications. They submit the letters through there, and then Naviance is connected directly to the Common App. So that's just been tremendous. Like students no longer have to chase teachers down for recommendation letters, but we wanted to make sure our letter of recommenders are writing strong letters for the students. And this is important. I think a lot of families underestimate the weight that a recommendation letter has on the college application and on outcomes. Like these colleges really do take seriously what is being written about students, and they're looking at it's almost like an Amazon review, right? So when we go, we're shopping for something on Amazon, and we always go look at the reviews, and we look at which product got the better reviews. So students have to be very careful that they're not asking any teacher who writes a subpar review for them. I mean, it's good, but it's not as good as the next students, their peer, who they write a raving review for them. And then, colleges look at that and they're like, okay, well, we're going to go this way because this teacher is just raving about this other student. So one of the things we do is we really work with the student to equip that. First off, ask the right teacher. So it's not like length of time the student has known the teacher, or like the class that teacher teaches is not as important as the teachers that's going to write a glowing recommendation letter. That's super important. I don't want the student to ask the English teacher just because they believe that the English teacher is going to write the strongest letter because they're an English teacher, right? They have to be a great writer. No, like if you feel like the science teacher is the one that you've excelled in that person's class and you feel like they're going to be able to cite examples for you, then ask the science teacher, because the science teacher is going to probably be a better recommender, is going to help your application than getting a mediocre letter from another teacher. So um so that's important. Junior year is usually the best year to grab recommendation letters. So I always advise students going into junior year to make sure you're building relationships with your teachers across the board, because you're going to need to ask one of those teachers. But I've had students get recommendation letters from sophomore teachers just because they've had that teacher during sophomore year, but maybe they've worked with that teacher in they were the robotics supervisor. So, so they're still working with that teacher even in their junior year. So we kind of just look at it case by case, but the goal is the same. Who's going to write the strongest letter for you? All right, other things that may be other things that might be part of the application that we're assessing is athletic status. So sometimes students can use their participation in athletics as a way to give them an edge in admissions. So sometimes that can be, working with going through the recruiting process, so being a recruited athlete that always gives students a leg up, or even if they're not recruited, at looking into being a walk-on, and that coach can sometimes be helpful. Same thing can be with her music abilities. If they go through the music program, they audition and they get in, it can be helpful because they're able to show, missions that they have a special talent, and there's some value, additional value that student would add. Or, I mean, this goes for any kind of exceptional talents student may have. Schools that offer interviews, I offer guidance on how to do well on those interviews. Those interviews are usually conducted by alumni in the area. They'll meet with students either online or at a local coffee shop. It's important that students represent themselves well. What schools are usually looking for in these interviews is just to really corroborate how the student was presented themselves in the application. Like, is this the person that we see in front of us as well? So I always tell students that they should come, it should be conversational, they should take it seriously, they should dress like professionally, and they should come with questions, because interviewers are alum of the school and they love students that come with a lot of great questions that get them to share about their experiences and things like that. And then I'll, make sure you have a thank you note and you send that. And that's always important. And these are things that students don't really know how to do. So a lot of this guidance is showing students how to do something that doesn't feel natural to them, but like we all know as adults that we have to do these things. Like, this is just part of being in the world of work. And so now we're teaching them how to do it. And I'll tell you that students who go through this college admissions process really well and really do a great job at things like internships when they get to college, and then getting first jobs, because they've already had to go through this exercise of putting together deliverables and branding themselves, and it's very helpful. All right, and then there's residency things that come up. And so what this is really related to is when you get into the college application, for particularly like the public schools, they ask if you're a resident of the state, and this can have implications on admissions rates. So when a student is applying to a public school, the admissions rate will differ depending on residency. So it's usually higher for in-state students than out-of-state students, and also and likewise with financial aid, your price is different depending on your residency. All right, so we as I talked about in the presentation, we offer all the services that are needed to shepherd students through this process. So prior to junior year, we offer all the services related to planning. So the goal setting I talked about, the work in exploring colleges and exploring potential majors, test prep strategy and timeline, aligning high school coursework with goals and with future plans and a major and extracurriculars, summer planning, pre-college programs that can really help give students that extra exposure and internships. Those are things that we help with. So, and that's for students that are 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. And then for our students who are juniors and seniors, we help with all parts of the college admissions process. So, that's the college list building, the optimizing the resume, identifying the best teachers to write recommendation letters, and devising a strategy to optimize admission chances. So looking at major selection, and also just, we do a lot of work. So I show students how to go through Naviance and come up with their best chances for schools that they're targeting. And that really does help students feel like decide where to direct their focus. So I've had students come in and say, Miss, I want to go to Cornell, I want to go to Cornell. We look at the data and I say, hey, listen, your school's not a good feeder for Cornell, but your school's a great feeder for Duke or for Johns Hopkins. And then they see the data and then they realize, oh yeah, you're right. I should probably look at that school. And it ends up being a great choice for them. So we drill down just like that into help with all the essays, editing the essays, reviewing college applications, helping the student prepare for interviews. If they get deferred or waitlisted, we help with that. So we help with all of those things. And we have a wonderful track record. I mean, we've made a name for ourselves in this region and nationally in helping students get into some of the best schools in the country, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, MIT. Year after year, our students get into these great schools. So in this last cycle, 67% of our students were admitted into an Ivy or Ivy equivalent university, 74% are into a top 30 university, and 88% into a top 40 university. So we really excel in this, and it's, a combination of time, planning, being strategic, and really knowing what these schools are looking for and how to help students tell that story to get into some of these schools. So definitely feel free to head to our website and set up a free consultation. It's completely free. You sign up, you'll meet with me or one of our other counselors, and we will take you through our services and, get to learn about your student, what your family's goals are, and how our services can really help position you for those goals. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to field any questions that you'll have. That was a lot.